spend hours on this society, talking about Machu Picchu and their insane system of roading that would rival the Romans, or the macabre topic of human sacrifice, which was mainly child sacrifices. These were done during or after important events, such as the death of the emperor or during a famine. Children were selected as sacrificial victims as they were considered to be the purest of beings. But this video is all about the moment and the man that would bring it all down. Francisco Pizarro grew up as an illiterate child, but knowing his father was in the military, was powerful, and had connections was enough to see him change the course of his life. In an interesting twist, through his father's side, Francisco was a second cousin, once removed, of Hernán Cortés. Who was the man responsible for the fall of the Aztec Empire? Talk about a family set on power. As a young man, Francisco wanted to experience the world, and the best way to do this was jump on board a boat. On the 10th of November 1509, Francisco Pizarro embarked on a voyage from Spain to the New World with Alonso de Ojeda on an expedition to Uraba, which is the northern coast of Colombia. This voyage marked the beginning of Francisco's quest to become a conqueror. Upon arrival in the New World, Francisco sailed to Cartagena, where he joined the fleet of Martin Fernández de Enciso. From then, 1513, he accompanied Balboa in his journey across the Isthmus of Panama to the Pacific Ocean. It was on this journey that made Balboa and his crew the first Europeans to see the Pacific Ocean. Like normal, there was plenty going on in the political realm, and the following year, Pedro Arias Dávila became the newly appointed governor of Castilla de Oro, which meant he replaced Francisco's friend, Balboa. Over the next 5 years, Francisco put in the hard yards and became a close associate of Dávila. He was rewarded, and the governor assigned him a repartimiento of natives and cattle, which meant he was given slave labor and animals for a large farm of his own. By 1519, Dávila had had enough of Balboa, and then used Francisco to arrest his old captain and bring him to trial. Balboa, of course, was guilty of nothing, aside from the fact he was worthy competition to Dávila. Balboa was beheaded in January 1519, and now, after proving his loyalty, Francisco was rewarded with the positions of mayor and magistrate of the then recently founded Panama City. This had been his first real test in the world of politics, power and greed, and he passed with flying colors. Now he had power and money behind him, and he could begin his real quest to become a conqueror. From stories from previous expeditions, Francisco learned that there was potential for a huge gold haul if he made it there. With tales of the great El Dorado in his ears, Francisco set up an alliance. Francisco, a priest, Hernando de Luque, and a soldier, Diego de Almagro, were to explore and conquer the south. It was here they agreed they would divide and conquer equally. So in 1524 they set off on their first attempt. However, they did not get very far, and along the coast of Colombia they had to turn around and return to Panama, back due to lack of food, sickness, and horrific weather. On the 10th of March, 1526, after regrouping, Francisco then left Panama with 2 ships with 160 men and several horses. He reached as far as the Colombian San Juan River. Soon after arriving, the party separated, with Francisco staying to explore the new and often perilous territory off the swampy Colombian coasts, while the expedition's co-commander, Almagro, returned to Panama for reinforcements. Once new supplies arrived, they set off once again, and this time Francisco encountered a native settlement that had recently come under the Incan rule. It was Atacames on the Ecuadorian coast. However, there were so many natives, and they were not happy at all to have the Spanish there. Francisco did not hang around and ended up in Isla de Gallo. The other 2 set off back to Panama for more supplies and to show off their gold, textiles, and other bounty they had acquired. By now, Francisco had the scent of gold in his nose, and there was no stopping him. Although they only had small samples of gold, what they did have was dead settlers, terrible weather, no firm success in acquiring new land. So, when the new governor of Panama, Pedro de los Rios, got wind of this, he sensed failure on the horizon. He would no longer fund anything for Francisco. It was now the famous 13 was formed. After declaring to the world, Francisco said, "There lies Peru with its riches. Here, Panama and its poverty. Choose each man what best becomes a brave Castilian. For my part, I go to the south." Safe to say the next part of the mission had a fair amount of success. By April 1528, finally reached the northwestern Peruvian Tumbes region. This was the first real success the Spanish had so long desired. The men received a warm welcome of hospitality and provisions from the Tumpis, the local inhabitants. Checking the territory, Francisco had a few separate accounts, telling him of the riches of the land, including the decorations of silver and gold around the chief's residence, plus more around the houses. The Spanish also saw for the first time the Peruvian llama, which Francisco called little camels. So he had proof of riches, new animals, textiles, and friendly natives. Hearing that Panama would not support him for more expeditions, Francisco headed straight to Seville to see the king. It was here that King Charles I. He was impressed with all he was shown, but had to leave on business. It was then up to Queen Isabella to sign the documents and give the green light for future expeditions for the Spanish crown. In 1531, Pizarro once again landed on the coast near Ecuador. However, he was not greeted so warmly, which resulted in the Battle of Puna. It would see another conquistador come to his aid and carry on the Tumbes region. However, when they arrived, the settler area was deserted and chiefs explained that fierce tribes of Punians had attacked them and ransacked the place. Moving into the interior in May 1532, Francisco would establish the first Spanish settlement in Peru, San Miguel de Piura. Francisco and his two comrades, Diego de Almagro and Hernando de Luque, would continue their good fortune and be well on the way to being famous conquestors. Around this time, within the jungles and elaborate cities of gold, there were two brothers at the center of a bloody royal battle for power. Their great father, Huayna Capichad, passed away, most likely from smallpox or another new disease that was infecting the Inca. Before his eldest son could assume the throne, he also perished from disease as well. Leaving an empty throne, the remaining brothers were now battling it out. Huáscar and Atahualpa would both sustain serious casualties and injuries during this period. However, it would be Atahualpa who came out the victor. Atahualpa then sent off an emissary to consult the oracle of the Huaca, god Cataquil. It was here that the prophecy would see Atahualpa's advance would end poorly. Furious at the prophecy, Atahualpa not only went to the sanctuary, but he killed the priest and ordered the temple to be destroyed. During this period, we know that this is when he first learned that Francisco and his expedition had arrived in the empire. Atahualpa decided to check out this foreign party, and after observing them, decided they did not have the manpower or weapons to be of any concern for him. So he allowed them to continue, and even invited them to his home, his Cajamarca Plaza fortress. Francisco had now worked his way into Peru. He was now basically on the doorstep of King Atahualpa. He must have been beyond excited. The power and glory we now in his grasp. All he had to do was take down this king. On the 15th of November 1532, fresh from battles with his brother Atahualpa, was resting in the Incan baths, and he received an invitation to visit Francisco. He accepted the invite and said he would attend the following day. The Incan king would then continue to enjoy the healing properties of the hot springs and potentially some local brews. The following day, Atahualpa left his camp around 12 with a large number of men in ceremonial attire. The walk to Francisco was slow, and Atahualpa entered the town late in the afternoon in a litter carried by 80 lords. With him were 4 other lords in litters and hammocks, and 6,000 men carrying small battle axes, slings, and pouches of stones underneath their clothes. It was said by some that he was very drunk from what he had imbibed in the thermal baths before leaving, as well as what he had taken during the many stops on the road. In each of them, he had drunk well, and even there on his litter, he requested drink. Sounds like the king had a very relaxing journey to meet the Spanish. However, during this time, Francisco had been preparing an ambush. He was not playing around. He knew this to be an opportunity to make the king submit to Spain or die. As they arrived, the Inca found no Spaniards in the plaza, as they were all inside the buildings, waiting for the signal to attack. The Spanish cavalry and infantry were in fact inside 3 long buildings around the square. Some musketeers and 4 pieces of artillery were also located in a stone structure in the middle of the square. The only man to emerge was the Dominican friar Vicente de Valverde with an interpreter. This was where the Dominican friar forcefully explained the true faith and the fact that Atahualpa would need to pay tribute to the Spanish king. As you can imagine, it did not go down well. After fighting with his brother for control, there was no way he would bow the knee to a foreign man. Some report that Atahualpa was invited in to eat and drink, however, instead of being able to discuss anymore, Atahualpa demanded the return of everything the Spaniards had taken since they landed. Not making any headwaves for a peaceful acceptance of the Spanish throne, the friar then called for Francisco. At that moment, he gave the signal. The Spanish infantry and cavalry proceeded to come out from their hiding places and charged the unsuspecting Incan, killing a great number, while the rest fled in panic. The unexpected level of violence saw Atahualpa on the back foot. As the men had spent a long day carrying their king and time in the hot pools, they were not prepared. As a result, Atahualpa was captured. After all those who carried him were killed. Not a single Spanish soldier was killed. This is where the story takes a dark turn. A couple of days later, the Spanish sacked the Incan camp. Of course they would find treasures of gold, silver, and emeralds. Realizing that the Spanish had an obsession for his gold and jewels, he told Francisco that he could fill up a large room with gold and silver twice within 2 months. Atahualpa was essentially trying to buy his freedom from the prison he was sitting in. Francisco and his fellow conquestors would now know that there was officially great wealth in this land. All he had to do was keep looking, and they were on the right path. For sitting in their prison was the Incan king. Francisco decided Atahualpa was too much of a liability alive. As word had begun to scare the Spanish soldiers, one of the Incan king's generals was preparing to attack. Under duress from the military, Francisco proceeded to set up a trial on the 29th of August, 1533. Now history can say Francisco and De Soto were not happy about the trial or execution. De Soto was on a military mission the day of the trial and execution, and upon his return expressed his shock and horror that the trial and execution had taken place, stating he should have been taken to Castile and judged by the emperor. King Charles would also later write to Francisco, "We have been displeased by the death of Atahualpa, since he was a monarch, and particularly as it was done in the name of justice." So what was the final Incan king charged with? He was guilty of revolting against the Spanish, practicing idolatry and murdering Huáscar, his brother. Atahualpa was sentenced to death by burning at the stake. Now this was a terrifying sentence for him, as the Inca believed that the soul would not be able to go on to the afterlife if the body were burned. Friar Vicente de Valverde stepped in and told Atahualpa that if he converted to the Catholic faith, he may be able to commute the sentence. In agreement, Atahualpa was baptized into the Catholic faith. He was given the name Francisco Atahualpa. Can you believe that? Now named after the man who sought to take over the entire Incan Empire. On the morning of his death, Atahualpa was interrogated by his Spanish captors about his birthplace. Atahualpa declared that his birthplace was in what the Incas called the Kingdom of Quito, in a place called Caranqui, today located 2 kilometers southeast of Ibarra, Ecuador. In accordance with his request, he was executed by strangling with a garrote on July 26, 1533. Atahualpa was succeeded by his brother Tupac Hualpa, and later by another brother, Manco Inca. However, the Incan Empire was now in demise. The Spanish were never far from taking it all, although they did resist. Without the unity of a great king, it was a losing situation against the tide of Spanish soldiers. Francisco and his fellow conquestors would continue his march through the country, and the Spanish finally sealed the conquest of Peru by entering Cusco on the 15th of November, 1533. Now I'm sure many are wondering about the germs that came with the new settlers. Wasn't it the common colds and viruses that killed the Incan people? Well, yes, part of that is true. The viruses had also caused epidemics to rip through the various Incan communities, from the rivers to the high mountains. Coupled with civil war, epidemics, and Spanish colonial rule, in just over 100 years by 1620, the Andean native population had declined by approximately 90%. A side note, of course, Francisco returns home very wealthy. He would set up the family with a vast fortune. However, no amount of money could save him, and in Lima, on the 26th of June, 1541, he would be assassinated in his own home. He was killed by the son of one of his fellow conquestors, one of the 3 whom they all decided to share all proceeds equally, Diego de Almagro. Even with all his money and fame, it was power that killed him. Just as the last Incan king had died, Francisco would also perish in the hands of those seeking power.